Thank you so much for joining us this lunch hour. We're so glad to welcome you to the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Arts Zoom programming, which we've been doing for the last 6 weeks now and plan on continuing throughout the summer and into the fall. I'm Emily Schlemowitz and I'm the curator at the WMQFA, and I'm very glad to be here with our distinguished artists. Before I introduce them, a couple of housekeeping things. You're welcome to ask questions. We encourage it. You can do so by typing in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, I'm extremely excited to be joined by Linda Marcus, Heidi Parks, and Nirmal Raja. They have very graciously agreed to appear in this Zoom format, and it's really good to see their faces. Before we begin our conversation, a bit of biographical information about them. Linda Marcus is a nationally recognized textile designer and fiber artist. She makes work that embraces the expressive and tactile qualities of fiber, while also incorporating less traditional materials. Her work has been exhibited across the country, and she has been involved in the Milwaukee art scene, including as the curator and designer of the inaugural Contemporary Art Collection at the St. Kate, the Arts Hotel located in downtown Milwaukee. Heidi Parks is a decorated quilter and quilt instructor. She regularly teaches at the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Arts and is a current member of the museum's education committee. Her evocative quilts utilize textiles from domestic culture, fashion, family heirlooms, and scavenged prints. These cloths are often beset with hand stitching that functions as a layer of drawing on the quilt surface. And Nirmal Raja is an interdisciplinary artist whose sensitive practice examines notions of memory, identity, place, and belonging through a range of materials and processes. She has exhibited throughout the Midwest and nationally and internationally. And all three of these artists have been shown in exhibitions at the museum and will be exhibited during our upcoming Remnants exhibition in 2021. And Remnants is an exhibition of contemporary fiber artists who utilize textile remnants and other unconventional materials in a fiber-based way. So I invited them here today to talk about their connection to fiber and to share their artistic practices, and I can't wait to see their beautiful work and hear their insights. Without further ado, let's get into the first question. I wanted to kind of find out what draws you to fiber. How did you get started, and how is fiber incorporated into your practice today? So who wants to go first?
Go for it, Heidi.
I guess my screen lit up because I laughed.
Go for it.
All right, so here's my PowerPoint. Sharing images. Play from current slide. I got a lot of inspiration from my family. So this is a quilt that my grandmother organized before I was born. And there are blocks from all of my aunts and a lot of my mother's friends at the time. And it was just always really special knowing that, like, even some of my aunts who I'd never saw sewing, or they never really talked about textiles, obviously they know what they're doing with a needle and thread. And I find that inspiring. And also just the history of textiles as being so connected to women, and that, like, anytime I have success in the quilting world, I feel like it's score one for me, but also score one for, like, women and people respecting and honoring the time and talents and energy of women. This 1-minute video is a time lapse of me piecing a quilt in 3 hours, and like piecing the quilt top. And I think there's so much that you can see here that is what I love about being involved in textiles. They're clean. I can be in my apartment. I can wear comfortable clothing. Doesn't smell bad. The textiles are so portable and foldable. I was one time in a show in New York with an 8-foot quilt, and it would have cost a fortune to send an 8-foot painting to New York, but I just folded up my quilt in my carry-on and flew there, and it, like, happened. And I really love that about working with textiles.
Linda?
I'm up. You know, I love seeing the fact that that Heidi get so much inspiration from her family. I think all of us probably get a lot of inspiration from our families. I think I'm drawn to fiber in general. I've had a diverse kind of way of getting into this is by the dual purpose of it, in the sense of, fiber can be, used for utility and also as an aesthetic. And a lot of what I get my inspiration from is nature. I mean, these are some photographs of bark on trees. And the first things that I started making had a lot of texture to them. And if you think about what bark provides to a tree, it provides protection. And so in a weird sort of way, it's kind of like protecting what is precious on the inside. So I really love that about nature. And there's another, here's one where I loved this shot because it was like, the frozen water was encasing this bit of nature. And so I ended up doing this piece that I have not shown publicly, actually. And it's called From the Beginning, and it's made of raw fiber, and it's actually a pretty large piece. I don't know, have a second photo. Yeah, there's a second photograph of a portion of it, of raw fiber and like a polyurethane strips to give it some body, and then some netting as well. But I love the fact that fiber can be used for different things. It can be used for identity, it can be used for utility and warmth, and it's all around us. And so I think it's part of what makes us human is our connection to fiber.
And that's so beautiful. I had never thought of that metaphor between humans and clothing and trees and bark.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'll ever look at a tree the same way. That's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, I'll share my screen. All right. So fiber, I've been dwelling on it a lot lately, especially because we moved from a home to a condo, and all of my artwork is in storage units, and fiber is something that I'm actively reconnecting with, to, as precisely, Heidi, what you mentioned with how portable it is and how it can expand and compress into a small package. So I've been thinking more along the lines of that. And also I, kind of grew up with fiber around me. Let me see if I can share. How can I share? Here we go. So I'm from India, and the textile traditions in India was a heavy influence. And I always loved the dresses that my mom's got made for me when I was little. And even now it's become a big fascination for me. And whenever I go to India, to resist not buying as much as I could. And what do I do with this? And it's been really amazing. It's a rich source of color, texture, tradition, everything. So, and also the narrative tradition that, we often hear about the Bayeux tapestry and how history is recorded with needlework and weaving or other practices in textile. But also in India, there's a whole tradition of storytelling with embroidery as well. So that's been a big inspiration too. And I also see fabric as a metaphor for how we are interconnected as a world. I think I'm exploring this notion of how if there is a tear in one part of the fabric, the whole fabric is affected. And that's precisely what's happened with COVID-19. And so this work is made out of hanji, which is Korean paper. And that also is fiber in a way. And I examined hanji under the microscope and used those patterns to make this installation. So fabric as material, metaphor, history. So just wanted to share that.
That's beautiful, Nirmal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like the humanity of fabric seems like a thread throughout all of your work. And I just love that. I think what draws me to fiber is the humanity of it and how it's ubiquitous and utilitarian, and yet holds these deeply personal memories. And like there's, you know, it's just, there's nothing like picking up your loved one's shirt and having that smell or having that residual warmth. It's just like, it's a very evocative medium. We did have a question. Someone was wondering about what if you could explain, Linda, a little bit about the raw fiber, what you meant by that.
Oh, it literally was from the sheep. I got it after they had been shaved, and I dyed the fibers, and I left them in their raw form as much as I possibly could.
And she also wanted to know, what textiles did you use in the bark?
In the bark, I didn't make those. No, those were actual bark shots.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I didn't. Mother Nature made that.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. So where do you find your inspiration? I know you guys talked about it a little bit, but can you talk a bit more?
Mm-hmm.
Heidi, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll just be in a loop.
Yeah.
So this is the one that I've really got a lot of slides for. So my inspiration sometimes is just like a diary. The quilt that I made for Remnants, and I'll show more about that one later, was just me tracking my time in India. I had longed to go there for over 5 years, and especially as a yoga instructor and a textile person, it was calling to me so much. And so I wanted to document that. And it was tough to be there. So there was, and also just to sew outside of my home, to be sewing in a variety of places. And I wanted to make something that was forcing me to be within those constraints of like, what can I make when I only have what I have when I'm traveling with my one suitcase? So that's this quilt. And then otherwise, Mark Bradford is one of my top favorite artists in the whole world. This is me meeting him back in 2011.
Oh, wow.
And he makes a lot of meaning with his materials. He uses a lot of found pieces of posters and things in his work. So these are the quilts that I made that I think really connect with his work. I have a history of being a painter, and one time I photographed my painting palette and put it up on Instagram, and everyone said, I see a quilt. And then 4 years ago, I made a quilt inspired by that photo. This is a quilt that I made of this place, which is Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. I was living there at the time. And then later I made a quilt of the lakefront in Milwaukee. I adore Georgia O'Keeffe. We had a mural of this painting in my elementary school, and I think it just got burnt into my brain from those 6 years of life, looking at it consistently. And so every time I fly, I love looking out the window of a plane. That's a photo I took, and then the quilt that I made. And here's a little 15-second video of me piecing. And this is some machine piecing that I was doing at the time. And I ended up realizing that I was making the quilt sideways all along as I was piecing it here. But just that inspiration of looking out the window of an airplane and being amazed. And that's the quilt. Andy Warhol's another favorite of mine. I love telling the story of how this painting came to be. But that grid of having 36 squares inspired me to make some of my quilts. This was an exhibition at the Milwaukee Art Museum when I first moved here to Milwaukee, and Philip Guston talks about how he scraped away the paint in this top right corner where it's gray and blue, and talked about how it being a memory or a ghost in the work. And I thought, like, I remember when I could do that when I was a painter, and how can I do that as a quilter? It was this quest that I was trying to figure out for a whole year. How can I do it without it being violent? He's not burning the painting, he's just gently scraping away. And so this is the work that I made, and this is the original colors. And then I put a layer of silk and transparent cotton on top of it. So it created this ghost in the work, but it was also very gently, like I was protecting it, the way that, you know, almost like using a cloth to wipe away a tear, these painters are able to remove something and create this feeling of absence or loss, or that something is missing in their work. I also love to photograph the surface of water, and this is a in progress image of one of the quilts that I had in the water exhibition recently at the Quilt Museum. And this last one is Cy Twombly, is a favorite painter of mine, and I used this minimal color palette and the directionality of his writing to inspire the pattern of the quilting and the applique in this very subtle quilt that I made. Linda?
Okay, I guess I'm up. I didn't vote as many you did, so I'll just talk about the artists that I love. One of my inspirational artists, which is Annie Albers and the Bauhaus weaving group. I mean, they really, and not even just so much aesthetically, but more instrument in the way in which women's work became, it was appreciated beyond craft, and it was, and now is being, it seems like, a revival of people who really appreciate fiber arts and quilting and how that plays into the contemporary art world. For me, that's kind of the same, you know, but for many years it's, you know, fibers has been considered craft, you know, so the pioneers are the women that have led that. I have a tremendous amount of respect for. Another favorite artist is Sheila Hicks, whose work that I absolutely adore. I wish I could use color the way in which Sheila does, and also the way in which Nirmal does, and the way in which Heidi does.
I think you do.
I'm a bit of a minimalist, and I really love color, but for some reason, you know, I'm not as good with it. You know, and Louise Bourgeois, a huge favorite of mine, tend to be, you know, they're kind of feminist artists, but at this, I mean, I don't like, I wasn't drawn to them because they're feminist artists. I was drawn to them because I really love their work. And then one male artist that I really love, and he's always has had his foot in both fashion and art, which is Sterling Ruby. And I really connect a lot with him because he looks at a lot of kind of apocalyptic kind of notions of things that would happen, and his methods are similar to stuff that I've been doing for a number of years. So I really find inspiration in, you know, all of those. But outside of just the art world, I think I'm inspired by the people around me, the culture around me, what I'm feeling at that point, and I try to always like keep little lists of whatever those emotions are and why I might be feeling that way, and whatever I'm seeing. I know Nirmal is really good about posting stuff she sees every day on her walks and all that stuff. And it's the same thing. You know, I'm constantly kind of having these little lists, and then I look at them over a period of time, and then I go, what's going on? Why am I attracted to that? And so that's really the other inspiration.
Great. So simply put, I guess my work is about processing life. So that's why it changes so much over a period of time, because our life, everything, the world around us is changing so much. Can you see my screen now? Yes.
Yes.
So as far as inspiration, that's one of the inspirations, is just life happening around me. But also I look at artists who have a kinship with, and my recent big influence has been the Korean American artist Kim Suja, and how she often speaks about the body as a needle that travels through the world. So she had this epiphany when she was a young artist, when she was pushing a needle through the fabric, and she bodily felt it. And now in her practice, she does a lot of performance in different spaces. This is her in Japan, I think, staying still, but life is moving around her. And it's recorded in a video. So she's been a big inspiration for me. And so this is a work that was featured in the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts last year, was it? Last year, and then at the Alice Wiles. And it's a video performance which uses green screen technology that I'm doing a video performance of sewing, and it's a montage into the video of the world changing around me. I often take videos of water bodies wherever I travel, and so I put it in a montage, and then kind of merged the video performance with it and then projected it on a fabric. So it looks like you're sewing into the fabric. So stories, that's the other aspect, I think, that enters my work, and it's a big inspiration, is how people who have similar stories like me have navigated life. So this particular soft sculpture also has an audio installation of women, Indian American women who have migrated to this country, sharing their experiences of life when they first came to this country and how it's evolved since then. So it's an immersive audio installation, but also a soft sculpture, kind of mimicking the messiness of life and how complicated some of these stories are. And these are collected garments, collected saris that I've used in the work itself. So those are some of the inspirations, I think. Yeah, this is a close-up.
So an attendee was wondering if you find yourself drawn to male or female works more than the other, and why?
I don't think it's so gendered for me. I am drawn more to artists who are female because I feel like the experiences are similar, but I'm also drawn to people like Clifford Still, Mark Rothko. There's so many, amazing male artists that I look at also. So not necessarily gendered.
And for you and Heidi and Linda?
No, I'm not either. It's the work. So, and there are some very good male artists. And of course my old brain here cannot think of their name, but there's a gentleman who does these knitted like suits. And of course, Nick Cave, is known for that. But honestly, it's the work, and what draws me to them.
I think, maybe from having gone to art school and studied the canon so much and going to art museums, and still most of the art in museums is made by men, that when I write lists of the people who inspire me, usually it is more men than women. And then I have to remember and go back and say, like, wait a second, let me update my list and be a little more equal. And I think it's just that, culture showing up in when I make those quick lists of, yes, I do love Clifford Still, and I have photos of how his work inspired mine. And it's me just trying to create a habit to say, no, there are so many women artists that I love and support, and I want to make sure that I am referring to them when possible. But it's a habit that I'm working on training myself to mention both equally.
Emily, I forgot to mention one other point in the inspiration field. So can I share my screen again?
Please do.
So the other thing that seems to generate inspiration and work for me is invitations from collections. And so this is a show that happened in the Helen Louise Allen Textile Collection at UW-Madison. They have a beautiful archive, and some artists were invited to dig into the archive and make work in response. And so it was such a great visit. I didn't even know that this archive existed, and I had a ball just looking at everything. And so I chose this door hanging as a prompt to generate work. And so this is what came out of it, which is looking at door hangings being a positive, welcoming symbol, and transitioning from the inside to the outside, and how that relates to migration and all the different borders that we put up between countries. And so I made a panel each of the most dangerous land borders in the world currently as a response to that collection. So oftentimes it's, I love digging into archives, and being given the invitation to go curate something and make something in response is very inspiring for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
Did people walk underneath that piece? Were you able to walk underneath it?
Yeah. Oftentimes the work, I like to involve space. And so symbolically, they're not only viewing the door hanging, but also symbolically crossing those borders.
Mm-hmm. I might have missed some questions here. Do fashion trends influence your art?
I'll let you take that, Linda.
You know, quite honestly, I think art influences fashion more than fashion influences art, to tell you the truth. I mean, I think, you know, visual artists and tend to be a little more ahead just by the mere fact that fashion has to be reproduced and fabrics have to be made, and just the slower process of it. Certainly for me, fashion affects, you know, kind of, I look at fashion and I look at art in the same way. So to me, they're just two different surfaces, and one covers the body and can move with the body. That's one canvas, and you know, a fiber piece that's on the wall is a different type of canvas. But to me, they're both canvases, and they just function a little bit differently. But certainly, things that are, you know, you'll see right now, you're seeing in fashion a lot of out of balance fashions. So you'll see like half of a shirt with one leg of a pair of pants, and things seem like they're struggling to find balance. And I think that's indicative of what's going on in culture. But I do think that trend has been from artists that were already doing that. So I think it tends to be artists influencing designers more than designers influencing artists.
Linda, I think that's really insightful. I definitely agree that I think art is influencing things in that way. I know just in my experience that I often match my art. And so especially when I'm making things, like I'll look at my outfit that I'm wearing and I'll look at the thing I'm making, and they a lot of times will have a lot in common. And in particular, I've been sewing more and more of my clothing, and then I like pull from the same stash of fabrics that I pull from when I make my quilts. So there are things where I could really be twinning with my art.
Well, I think, I'm not sure whether fashion influences my work, but yeah, I think Linda's right. It's the art, but also our histories in what we wear. I'm often kind of straddling, like, I don't know how to best gracefully wear both my cultural garments, but also Western convenience, you know, and do that with expression. So then, you know, it's just an active a picture that you want to give to the world, a view, an image. So yeah, I don't know.
Yes, we're getting lots of questions. Someone loved your fabric collection. Do the others have stashes as well? I think that's a loaded question.
I hoard fabric.
Yeah, I'm looking at stacks of fabric right now. Can't see behind me, but it's just piles.
I will be buried in fabric one day, just tons of it on top of me.
Yeah, and I have stashes of saris that I never wear. But I just, people give them to me and I have them, and they're just there. So, and then I can talk about how that went into my artwork too in a bit.
Don't you all think that having all that fabric around you is like your cocoon? It's like my creative little cocoon that I'm in, and I get inspiration from, and I feel the same way when I'm in my closet getting dressed.
Yeah.
I have all my favorite things kind of out, my scarves that I really love and stuff like that. And even if I won't wear them, they make me happy just to look at them, to look at the patterns and to be reminded of those patterns and those colors and the way that makes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I find too that, with textiles, you can't mix a color in the moment. So if you don't, when you're painting, you can buy a couple tubes of paint and then you can make all the colors. And with fabric, like if I want the nuanced specific color, I have to own that fabric. But I really do try to be mindful of how much I'm consuming. And certainly my work with mending clothing has influenced me to think about that more mindfully. And one of my favorite resources for getting fabric is the rummage sale that happens every year at the Quilt Museum. That is an incredible resource. Like, this fabric is from there and it's so good. I love that one. Also, when I travel, I feel like I try to wait for till there's a special occasion to add something to my stash, because I know I have a lot of fabric already. And so, for example, when I went to India, I was like, yes, I get to buy something.
Yeah, I too love looking at fabric when we travel. There's something about being in another place and just seeing what they have available, even though I'm not a quilter, but it's just a way to experience the culture.
Yeah.
So how has your practice changed over time, and what's your favorite part of your artistic process?
So for me, it is working with my hands is the thing that I'm doing more and more of. I shared that video previously of me working with my sewing machine when I did that night flight quilt, and then you saw me sitting on the floor doing hand quilting, and I've gravitated more and more to using my hands in my work. And a lot of that is just what feels good for me when I'm working. And I've made an effort to pull back and think, are there parts of my job that feel like drudgery? I'm doing an awful lot of work to be self-employed as an artist. And it just feels like if there's something that is not floating my boat when I am making my art, that needs to change. And so I wasn't really enjoying the sound of the sewing machine. And I found that was the moment when my back would start to hurt physically, was when I was going from the ironing board to the sewing machine to the design wall on a loop. And I thought, like, nobody's the boss of me but me. So, so I decided to change that. And for me, it started by working with whole cloth quilts, because I thought, well, I don't have to be piecing anything on the sewing machine if I'm working with a whole cloth quilt. And then I was able to innovate things like this, where there's that scrim on top, inspired by the Philip Guston painting that I shared. And now I've found some really exciting techniques for hand piecing things and using a visible stitch, so that when people look at it, they can tell it was hand pieced instead of looking the same as something that's machine pieced. And as you saw in the video of me on the floor, I'm appliquing really big pieces of fabric. And so I feel now like I'm able to hand piece a quilt in a similar amount of time to what it used to take me to machine piece a quilt. And that's super exciting to me. And it's based on me asking myself that question over and over and over again. What are my favorite parts of my job?
I think for me, you know, I've come this kind of in a little different way than everybody else has. And I came through, I don't know if many people realize this, but my background is actually in journalism, and I was a journalist for a very long time. And then because I had a family, started making my own handbags and garments. And so I come by way of being a visual artist and fiber artist through what I would say is storytelling. And these are a few of my previous pieces. This one actually has the dress I made also has one of my handbags in it. And that influenced kind of what I do now, in the sense that it's still storytelling, but it's in a different, the mode of storytelling has changed a little bit. This is a piece called Sleep on It that was in a show at the museum last spring, I think. And I love this piece because this is fiber reactive dyes on sheets, and then they were hand embroidered and quilted. And it's all about, decision making and the journeys in that decision making. And it allowed me to kind of express what was going on in my life at the time, which I've had some siblings who've been very ill over the last couple of years dealing with cancer, and how we use our brains to make decisions, and how sometimes that's scary and you have to make choices and things like that. So my use of materials has changed a little bit from fashion and journalism and storytelling, but in a weird way it's still kind of the same storytelling, but it's just facilitated in a different way. Many ways I think of myself more as a storyteller than anything else. So yeah, that's probably how mine's changed over the years. And I think it's going to continue to evolve too. I think both Nirmal and Heidi have been at this a little longer than I have, and I'm still kind of finding my way in what resonates with how I want to be telling my stories. So I'm a little closer to what Nirmal does, which is I tend to be, the form of my art takes different forms all the time. And there's some general themes that are in all of them, but if you looked at just the art themselves, it looks a little different. So I'm still kind of finding my way in that, and I hope that never ends. I hope that I keep growing and changing and being influenced by, I so love what Nirmal does, and I so love what Heidi does. And, and both of them have influenced how I look at things. It's, I won't do the same things that they do, but I look at their work and I go, wow, that's a really cool way to think about things. And so when I'm around other artists, I like to hear about how they think about things, because then it helps me to think about the things that I want to be storytelling about and how I might tell that story.
Linda, that work is just so colorful. And
I know, it's funny.
it's so beautiful. It's one of my favorite works, and I love the neon in it too.
Yeah.
So, well, let me share screen again. So for me, the work has changed recently since 2016, more towards politics. And like I said, I'm responding to what's going on around me. So we had tremendous changes over the last 4 years. So I'm going to show this. Oh, Heidi, I forgot to show this, but for fault lines, the previous work that I shared, I consulted with Heidi to show me the best techniques. As I'm not trained in fibers, so I'm always reaching out to experts, and I'm interdisciplinary. So, you're not a master of any particular medium. So you have to kind of investigate and learn from others who are experts. So I just wanted to throw that in there. That was so helpful, Heidi.
That piece that I just love it so much.
That was just, that made the work, that a few hours with you, and I was able to figure out how to make that work.
That was so exciting.
Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to respond to the hyper xenophobia that was going on, and is still going on. And then that was a time when I moved to the condo and I was stuck with unpacking, and I unpacked 2 suitcases of saris that I never wear. And oftentimes we think of garments and textiles as just garments, but they also carry a cultural history. And so I wanted to tap into that cultural history and use that in a performance-based collaboration, a photographic collaboration with Lois. We worked together over 2 years where I wore each one of my saris and performed in a public space in Milwaukee as an act of occupying space. And also just to kind of state that you can look different and have a different cultural history and identity, but yet be American. So we produced close to 70 images in this series, and this was our poster image taken over in downtown Milwaukee over Memorial Day.
Chicago.
It does look like Chicago, but it's actually right on Wisconsin.
Wow. Just like Chicago to me.
I love that work.
Yeah.
That work is really powerful. The direction you're walking in opposition to I love that.
Right. Yeah. And Lois is such a talented photographer, very quick in responding to what's going on. And these cheerleaders were walking the other way, and she just ran across the bridge and, and did a whole series of images. And this is what stuck. Yeah, it was such a great collaboration because it through the performance, through the collaboration, I eventually began to feel differently about my place in America. And I feel going from when the 2016 elections happened and I felt alienated, to a place where I felt like I have a role in the society as an artist, and I do belong here. I have a voice and I have a place. So it was an incredibly empowering project that utilizes fabric and garment as a symbol of history, as a symbol of identity and beauty and material. So this was at the Wisconsin State Fair. And the other part of the collaboration was me doing a rubbing of American history that's been engraved on the Milwaukee Riverwalk. It's a 30-meter long cotton organdy, which I did a rubbing of this history that's engraved on the boardwalk. And it became a prop for performance-based photography that spoke to the notion of whose story is recorded in history, who's being left out, and the struggles I myself have as an immigrant in this country, because you are entering a nation's timeline in midway. And so you have to own that history, no matter how good or how bad that is, it's still yours just by the fact that you came to this country and have become American. So all those conflicting emotions were performed and set to music for a video, and yeah, and then it was shared at the Warehouse Museum, both the fabric, the performance video, and also a community project. Lois and I choreographed a performance for community members. We invited them and they performed with the fabric. And a lot of these links, if the audience wants to know more, there are links in my website that they can go to. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Let me stop share.
An audience member was wondering what material you used to do the rubbing.
Oh, the fabric was cotton organdy, and I used encaustic sticks. because I knew that if it is the normal graphite or charcoal that you normally use for rubbing on paper, I knew that the fabric was going to be a prop for performance. So I needed to figure out something that would stick to the fabric and not rub off when I manipulate it. And one of my professors at UWM, Dennis Sargent, who's retired now and in California, he did a lot of work with encaustic sticks on fabric. So I actually got on the phone with him and asked him what what did he use, and yeah, so that encaustic stick.
So we kind of touched on this a little bit with the fashion crossover question, but you all seem to have your feet in both the textile world and the larger art world. Can you talk about how you navigate bridging those two worlds and kind of what that's like?
Yeah, so I have some fun photos of me at exhibitions for this one. So here I am, kind of clearly in the art world and in the quilt world. The image on the left is with this piece right here, and you can see from the side angle that I've stretched it like a canvas that would be stretched on a wooden stretcher like a painting. And I'm even wearing all black like we do in the art world. And then on the other side, it's a recent, the last exhibition that I was in person was in February at the Wisconsin, or at QuiltCon, and we met in Texas. And so this is a piece that I made in response for a call for art in 2017 about the election. And it was a show called Threads of Resistance. And I made this piece about the way that the election has been divisive within families. And it was in a traveling show with that exhibition. And I got it back, and I was really excited that I could share it in the quilt exhibition this year with the Modern Quilt Guild. And I like that the ideas in both works, to me, feel the same. And I feel like the work itself can live in both worlds, but the way that the exhibitions are, the way that you apply for things is a little bit different. I also find that there are other worlds that I'm in as well. So in addition to the art world and the quilt world, I'm in the mending world. So on the left, you can see me in an art gallery exhibition with some of my mended clothing on display. And on the right, I am in a space that is part of the makers movement and inspiring people to make their own things. And I think that that's been such a cool realm to enter, because it's a little different from the quilt world, where people are already serious about quilts and know what they're doing. And it's just people really wanting to make things with their hands again. And every time they go to a retreat or a workshop, hopefully they're learning a new skill and adding something handmade to their lives. So I love that that's like this new field that's starting to happen, where people want to make things. And then this photo connects a little bit to a question that my friend Pamela posted. She's a wonderful painter here in Milwaukee. She was asking about those two worlds getting a little more blurry lately. And I definitely think that that's the case. And on the left, I'm in an exhibition that I did. That was a solo show, but it happened to be in a quilt shop. And I loved the juxtaposition of that and getting to have like a normal art gallery type opening in a quilt shop. And then on the right, I was in the Piecework Collective in 2017, and 12 of us quilters spent thousands and thousands of dollars to rent a space in Chelsea near the Whitney Art Museum for 3 days to have an exhibition of our quilts in New York during Textile Month. And it was such a hip fine art space, and to be able to fill that with quilts was amazing. And as I mentioned earlier, the fact that we could send our quilts. I don't know how 12 painters would have an exhibition like that in New York. The logistics and the money just skyrocket like crazy. So I think there are a lot of people who are in the art world and are realizing that there's so many benefits of working with textiles, and that's blurring a little bit more. And also the ability to make meaning with your materials. That's a huge part of what drew me to working with textiles, in contrast to continuing to paint or work with clay. Ceramics was my first love. I can minimize this. Behind me, I've got this pottery that I made when I was in high school. And that was just my real first passion when I was making and being creative. And I find that there is a real blurring now, but also I know when I'm in the quilt world and I know when I'm in the art world. And I think for me, one of my biggest creative goals is to give permission to people who feel like they can't be in both worlds, to let them know that they can, whether that's, you know, talking to my friend Pamela, who's this incredible painter, and saying like, yeah, let's get your sewing machine set up. And sure, you can exhibit things within the textile world. And also, especially within the quilt world, giving permission to my students for how to engage in the art world, and to say, you know, watch lectures like this one and you'll learn the language. And, you know, go to some gallery openings and just observe, see how people interact. You know, if you want to be part of that world, show up, say hello, and move from there. And I've had a really good personal experience with doing that when I moved to Milwaukee and said, like, hey, I've never been in an exhibition before, but I'm really excited about it. And it was just such a welcoming experience connecting with both the quilt world and the art world in Milwaukee when I moved here 5 years ago. And I think sometimes people who don't have a degree in art think that there must be some secret that they need to have access to it or to be allowed or able to participate. And I like to try to dispel those myths as much as possible, because anyone can make art. It's not like you need a degree like when you're a doctor and you either are a doctor or you're not a doctor. It's more like being a healer. Anyone can be a healer. We all know what to do if someone is sick with a cold, and we have access to things to help make them feel better. And the same way that anyone can be a healer, anyone can be an artist. And we all have that innate power as humans to make things and connect emotionally with others. And I just really love being able to empower people to feel that way.
You do a good job at it.
Yeah, that's important work.
I'm empowered right now listening to you. You know, I think I take a little different approach, a more micro approach to the question. Although I agree with everything that Heidi was saying, that, you know, I think the boundaries are much more fluid. I think people are more open to it, and there's a lot of reasons why I think people are a little more open to it. But what I do right now is I'm more interested in, I look at macro things, which is these two pieces that you're looking at. The one on the left is called Pause, and the one on the right is called Eject. And they were in a exhibition last September, and it was my investigation of making fiber act like paint and paint act like fiber. And the one on the left, Pause, it's basically like about a dozen layers of paint and nothing else. And there's no canvas on this at all. This is not made of a canvas. So what you're looking at is basically molded paint. So I wanted the paint to act like fiber. And the one on the right is actually a gessoed textile of a jacket that I had made my daughter when she was leaving for college. And these two pieces are about motherhood as well as the materiality of these things. I love the juxtaposition of trying to make one act like the other, and showing really how common they both are. And I find that fascinating, to try to make these. I'm a little more material driven in the sense of trying to make these materials act differently than they were intention to do. And I think that that's kind of interesting, and I think that it goes hand in hand with what's going on in the art world, which is these boundaries are much more fluid, and people are more open to looking at things in a little different way.
I love that these are a pair. I just think that
There's more of them.
oh, there are.
I didn't load all these pictures. I didn't know how many pictures to load in. So
They're beautiful, though.
Oh, I love this work.
And I really loved doing these, and looking at the materiality. And later on, I'll show you some work that I've been working on since we've been in stay-at-home status, kind of playing with this same concept as well.
Linda, I love getting to see the connection between your work and my work, where we're putting textiles in formats that are traditionally for paintings and drawings, the way that you have your frames, the way that I've done the stretched canvas. It reminds me of one of my college professors, Diana Guerrero Macia. She makes quilts and textiles and sews things with felt, and she just calls them paintings, and has a beautiful way of defending why and how she uses that language. And I think it's just been really fun to play with people's perceptions, because it changes the work so much when you see it.
Well, and on a very personal note, this is about motherhood too, and it was my efforts to kind of change the way people look at women who may have left the work world like myself for a period of time to raise my family, and that is something of value. And so that was a little bit of the influence of all of this, and then honoring that labor of motherhood in it. So there's lots of layers of things in it.
Yeah.
Well, I totally agree with Heidi and Linda about the lines being blurred. I think as an interdisciplinary artist, fabric enters my work as one other material, but also as an interdisciplinary artist, I've learned to be humble in my approach to materials. The materials will tell you what they will and will not do. So you cannot make something do that, that it just simply cannot, So like I said before, I really appreciate and tap into people who've had a lot of experience, and they've become experts in their particular field, and listening and learning. So this particular work is one of my earlier fiber-based pieces, screen printed, resist dyed, and then layers and layers of screen print inspired by the lake. This is where I would say it's been so incredible to have such a supportive art community in Milwaukee. And Marna Browner, who's also a professor, retired now, helped me with creating this work. She showed me techniques of resist dyeing and techniques of how to screen print on fabric, and it's been so incredible to have that kind of support. This is also from that series, which is repurposed one of my mom's sari fabric, silk fabric, indigo dyed, and then screen printed. So I don't particularly think of them as separate things, because that's how I approach my practice, is just to incorporate different techniques and traditions precisely for those properties that these materials come with, those histories that they come with. This particular work was about how I felt 4 years ago about being contained and compressed in my identity, and how that could be communicated through materials. So each one of these has a whole 6-yard fabric, 6 yards of sari fabric compressed and cast along with plaster and poured into a mold box that was lined with a collagraph plate. So the prints that you see on the plaster cubes are actually prints. They're not drawn later. I inked up the plates, lined the mold box, and then poured the plaster into it. Again, I'm so indebted with sculptors that I've tapped into and tapped on to show me how to cast plaster, how to create molds. Jill Sebastian helped me build mold boxes, and Katie Martin showed me how to create molds like these from objects. This particular one is called Contained, a still life where I've used containers from my grandmother's kitchen and containers that people have held on to when they migrated to this country. And, you know, just acknowledging that these have sentimental value. They come with some history that is indelible. You're holding on to these things across the ocean for some reason. And how human that is. And the fabric kind of takes on the symbolic presence of the human in this work. And what we, you know, by casting the interiors off a container, how you're giving shape to the emptiness. And it's not really empty, but filled with all of these memories and sentiments that come with these objects. So textile is used again as an ingredient to communicate with plaster, as a, you know, also kind of they are unexpected juxtapositions that create meaning in the work. This is another artist regarding the history and meaning that clothing especially comes with. She's a Chinese artist, Yin Shizhen, I think. I don't know how to pronounce the last name, but she primarily uses used clothing to make these sculptures. And in Eastern cultures, I don't know whether you've noticed, Heidi, there is a resistance towards using used clothes because they believe that clothing especially is like skin, and it holds the history of the body that wore those clothes. And so unless you know those person or they belong to the family, you typically do not buy used clothes because of that belief that this is,
I was not aware
like
of
skin.
that.
Yeah. So, you know, how do you harness that history of that cloth, of that skin, or the presence of the human history that's embedded in those fibers of the fabric? Is something that I'm dwelling on a lot. And especially with, you know, I have a hard time giving away fabric. So how do I use it with meaning? And so I've been thinking about how, you know, with connection to history and women, and how often women's stories are left out of history, recordings of history. And they're the kind of the building blocks of society. And so I created this work where I made 101 bricks embedded with plaster, which is eventually going to be part of an interactive sculpture piece that's going to be at 5 Points Gallery in the near future. Yeah, so that's kind of how I navigate those two worlds.
Thank you all. Just blown away by what you guys are doing, and I feel like I'm learning new connections just through this conversation, and I really love it. So I think we're gonna skip to there's been several people who have been asking how the quarantine has affected your practice, and what ideas and projects are you working on right now? So if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah. So just skip ahead a little bit. Oh wait, maybe that is that answer. Sorry. Okay, so this is the quilt that I made for Remnants, and it's a diary of my time in India. And it's interesting because I ended up finishing it during quarantine. So this is when I was exhausted and buying fabrics, but I did this beautiful calendar while I was there, and lots of bags and things that were part of my experience there. For example, this is a scrap from Queen of Hearts, who's a wonderful mender of saris there. And so some of these pieces I kept in the shapes that they were in when she gave them to me. And I think that adds so much to the story of that piece. And then I was able to quilt it during quarantine. And it just felt like this incredible, going to India, I had heard about it before I went, but till you experience it, it's not, couldn't really fully understand that shrinking of my personal space bubble, that like whatever I thought was full, whatever I thought was mine, I had to re-understand that when I was there. And then during quarantine, it was suddenly like my space bubble didn't end here. It was instead double my wingspan. And so the title of that piece is A Breath Has Four Parts, which is a yoga understanding that I have about noticing the inhale, the pause to transition, the exhale, and the pause to transition. And it felt so much like that quilt was made during a pause to transition. And the way that I quilted it felt like very informed by being in quarantine. And then since then, I began working on a 100 days project. So this is a quilt that I'm adding to right now. And I'm taking a Zoom class from my friend and very talented quilter, Sarah Nishiura. We've exhibited with her before in the water exhibition also. Yeah. And so I'm doing these hexagons with her and more hexagons and string piecing. And I've also been teaching a lot on Zoom and demonstrating how to add a big piece of fabric to your background. So I keep re-showing that, and then showing how to do a strange shape and demoing that over and over again for students. So I think my teaching and also the classes I'm taking are showing up. I'm not really doing one per day, but I'm trying to at least do like 7 per week and check in with it by the end of the week. I've also been sewing masks and sold a few masks and have many that I gave to, like, Mother's Day presents this year were masks. And so this is where I am right now, and been doing a lot of teaching on Zoom, and that's been really exciting to be able to do that, but it's been shifting the amount of time that I have now to be sewing and making things as those opportunities have presented themselves. And I made a quilt pattern that I dreamed up during this time, because I released my first ever quilt pattern at the very, very beginning of quarantine. And I actually wrote the pattern when I was in India and had it planned to come out during the same time as QuiltCon. It's a pattern for something called the scavenger hunt quilt. And so I wanted people to use only what they already had in their homes, and to kind of hunt around and like find a bowl and trace it and look up different things. And so I thought I would just be typing the instructions in once a week, and that would be it for this quilt along. But instead, because of quarantine, I had time and there was enthusiasm around it. So I ended up making 20 and sometimes even 40-minute videos where I would explain everything about the step and share with people how they could participate. And because it did so well and was so engaging, I wrote a quilt pattern that I've launched myself on my website. And so this is the first step and the last step in the quilt pattern. And all the things that you have to do to take care of a work of art once you've finished making it. And that's why I put all those hearts around it. Is like, once it's done, it's not done. That's the beginning of a whole new journey of getting your work out there and recognized. And this is a piece that I've been making that I've told maybe 8 people about it. So it's really a big coming out party for this one. And it's something that I also have made during this time. And it's about tracking days and tracking cycles and me trying to work through some different health problems that I've had with hormone imbalance. And I think a lot of women can relate to having one type of problem like that or another. And this time has been really helpful for me to reflect and to even try to pay attention to how is stress or maybe going too fast impacting my health, and what if I dialed things back a little bit? Would I then, not need different supplements or pills to feel better? So this is one that I'm really excited about and working now, and definitely the way that being in quarantine and COVID has influenced my personal practice.
Yeah, I think we've all been influenced by this quite a bit. Why am I not? Are you guys seeing anything or no?
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me get down to. I think for me, I've been drawn to fiber because I think that the habit qualities of it remind us of kind of being human. And I think being in this environment, and this is a good example, being on your computer, being on something cold and something that doesn't feel human, that we are like, I don't know about you, but I am thirsting for connection and comfort and materiality, and the antiseptic nature of computers. You need that balance. So, I had made a series of pieces. This is for something else. I kind of felt empty at the beginning of this. I made this piece and I was just kind of doing the brown one, and I was just doing my experimentation with paint acting like fiber. And this is another iteration of that idea. And I, wait, how do I get back? Oh no. Okay, now I need to get back. Trying to, negotiate that empty feeling. And then also I did the same concept and I was feeling like someone had punched us in the stomach. And so I made this piece, and it's the same concept of using paint like fiber. And this is paint. And it's literally looks like a sucker punch, like somebody has punched you in the stomach. Because I kind of felt like that when this all happened, like that we had been sucker punched, that we kind of were like, wait, what's going on? Wait, we're having a pandemic? Wait, what? And so I made this piece. And then I was, again, looking at, fiber acting like paint. And I made this piece. And it's the base of it is kind of, I don't know if you notice the texture on it. It has a flowing texture to it, and they're textiles, they're dresses. And I loved the way that they kind of created this texture to it, to the painting. I call that pink candle. And then the other thing that I was surrounded by is, I'm sure you all are too, but cardboard boxes are everywhere. And so I decided to take this one and, and embroider on top of it and use a darning needle and because it just felt like we're in this very fragile, weird state. And I've made a series of these that I just think they're kind of indicative of the way I feel right now. And I've made some masks for some friends and for my family, as well. I'm really hoping that we're not going to be wearing those for a long time. I'm hoping that we'll go back to a place where we can touch each other again, hug each other, give each other a handshake, and I'm hoping that will change. But I also believe in the resiliency of the human spirit. And I think that by all of us doing our artwork, it just helps us move through this process, if you will, of dealing with a very serious thing in our country and our communities, and trying, I think it brings out the best in people too. And trying to figure out a way that we can still be human.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm gonna go quickly through, since we skipped the fragment show. This is some work in my studio that utilizes fragments and experimentation with material. This has a story behind it. These are fragments sandwiched between silk organza, or fragments of maps and paper, fragments of garments embroidered with black. And this is kind of a close-up on the right. And this is probably the one that you're interested in, Emily, is for the show, is the impressions that fragments of fabric make. So this is cast plaster poured onto fabric that's been embroidered, so the texture gets picked up. These are sculptural works using fabric sculpting medium.
I love those, Nirmal.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, this speaks to, and there was a dance performance at the Alice Wiles where the dancers engaged with these pieces that speaks to loss and belonging and the absence. So this is kind of an inspiration. It's kind of a very classic, ancient form of carrying one's belongings. This is another artwork by Kim Suja. So right now, I've been doing a lot of embroidery because that is such a mobile and easy material to work with at home. So for the past 2 months, I've been working at home, embroider in my couch, on the dining table, in my daughter's bedroom. It's just so easy. I don't have to worry about pouring paint, spilling something, staining something. So that, and most of these have been text-based, and that kind of leads to my current series of 101, which is curating phrases from what I see in the media, also tapping into healthcare workers, inviting them to submit phrases about how they're feeling, what kind of danger they're in, and what kind of situations that they're forced into, and embroidering those into these cotton organdy fabric masks. They have very long ties, kind of an exaggerated expression on my part, just to, I think I imagine these in an installation with the ties draping down. But as a space where we can have to come face to face with what people are saying and thinking, and it's right there on the mask. So this is an ongoing project, and I'm going to pitch here to see if any of you know healthcare workers that want to submit a phrase for this project. You can find me on Instagram, Nirmal.Raja, and you can submit. And I'm going to embroider it into these masks. I have about 33 so far. I see it as a document of this time, a record, not so much a personal expression, but this is, again, how I process what's going on around me. Just the act of, translating something that comes through digital media on a cell phone text, email, or Facebook message, and then making into this slow, embroidered, very humble process of recording this. It also acknowledges the history of narrative embroidery, which is centuries old, so it's connected to that history as well. You know what, I think I'm gonna skip these. Should I, or are we running out of time, Emily?
We're running a little bit out of time.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna, should I go to the COVID quilt square?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so I'm so glad the museum's doing the COVID quilt, which is just such a socially engaged and collected record of this time. And so this was my contribution to the quilt, about how I feel. I've just been so in awe of how this pandemic has come upon us, and nature's ingenuity in just sucker punching us, I'm just so amazed. I know that there's so much suffering and pain that's coming to our doors, but also it's just such a brilliant move on nature's part to kind of have us slow down and let it recover. So yeah.
Take us up.
Yeah, so we are running, unfortunately, out of time. I feel like we need to do this again in person, hopefully. I really want to thank you all. I just think seeing your practices on the screen for the last hour and a half has been really the highlight of for a very long time. So thank you. I really appreciate it, and we really appreciate it. My director has been posting the donate button. We would love your donations to sustain the museum and to sustain the vitality of these programs. As I said, we are going to keep doing these even when we reopen, which I think I can announce is now going to be June 3rd. June 3rd. So it's just, so come see us and come keep seeing us online on Fridays. It's been a real treat. So I really thank you all.
Thank you so much for organizing this. I just have a quick question. Do we get a history of the chat so we can respond if necessary? I haven't been keeping an eye on the chat at all, so.
Yes, I will. I think I can do that. I can save the chat. So I will send it to you guys.
It's been such a pleasure to be on a panel with Linda and Heidi. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Yeah, so to be at a panel with people who are friends and peers and who welcomed me so beautifully when I moved to Milwaukee, and now I feel like, oh, I've been here 5 years, I'm not new anymore. It's really amazing to see the creative things that we have in common and to get to enjoy talking about them with other people instead of when we're just mingling together and getting to have wonderful conversations. So thank you guys, and a huge thank you to the museum for putting this together and for curating remnants. I'm so excited about that exhibition and to see that work on display. It's really, really
fun.
Thank you all. Stay safe.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
I'm gonna leave this open for a minute.